Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with Nonna Angie at the Davenport Public Library. For our chapter a day program, we are currently reading the Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. This is written by Kate DeCamillo. It's illustrated by Bagram Tulane. This book was published by Candlewick Press, and they have granted us permission to read this book together. Now we're on chapter 10, so we're getting kind of far into the book. So if you remember correctly, Edward is that little rabbit. He's that little rabbit right there. He's about 3 foot tall, China rabbit. He originally lived with Abilene Tulane and her grandmother, Pellegrina. Edward went on a sea cruise with them, ended up going overboard, spent some time at the bottom of the ocean. A fisherman finally caught him and brought him home and Edward was living with the fisherman and his wife Nellie, but Nellie for some reason thought Edward was a girl, so Nellie dressed Edward up in dresses, and Edward was really enjoying his life there. But at the end of the chapter, at the end of chapter 9, it says, "Life for a very long time was sweet. And then Lawrence and Nellie's daughter came for a visit." So that's where we left off at chapter 10. So there is the picture. Edward would sit in that high chair at dinner time and hang out with the family. He was pretty happy there. So let's see what's going on now. Lolly was a lumpy woman who spoke too loudly and who wore too much lipstick. She entered the house and immediately spotted Edward sitting on the living room couch. "What's this?" she said. She put down her suitcase and she picked Edward up by 1 foot. She held him upside down. "That's Susanna," said Nellie. "Susanna!" shouted Lolly. She gave Edward a shake. His dress was up over his head and he could see nothing. Already he had formed a deep and abiding hatred for Lolly. "Your father found her," said Nellie. "She came up in a net and she didn't have no clothes on. So I made her some dresses." "Have you gone skivvy?" shouted Lolly. "Rabbits don't need clothes." "Well," said Nellie. Her voice shook. "This one seemed to." Lolly tossed Edward back on the couch. He landed face down with his arms over his head and his dress still over his face, and he stayed that way through dinner. "Why have you got out that old high chair?" shouted Lolly. "Oh, don't pay it no mind," said Nellie. "Your father was gluing up a missing piece, wasn't you, Lawrence?" "That's right," said Lawrence without looking up from his plate. Of course, after dinner, Edward did not go outside and stand beneath the stars to have a smoke with Lawrence. And Nellie, for the first time since Edward had been with her, did not sing him a lullaby. In fact, Edward was ignored and forgotten about until the next morning, when Lolly picked him up again and pulled his dress down away from his face and stared him in the eye. "Got the old folks bewitched, don't you?" said Lolly. "I heard the talk in town. They've been treating you like a rabbit child." Edward stared back at Lolly. Her lipstick was a bright and bloody red. He felt a cold breeze blow through the room. Was a door open somewhere? "Well, you don't fool me," she said. She gave him a shake. "We'll be taking a trip together, you and me." Holding Edward by the ears, Lolly marched into the kitchen and shoved him face down into the garbage can. "Ma," Lolly shouted, "I'm taking the truck. I'm going to head on out and do some errands." "Oh," came Nellie's tremulous voice. "That's wonderful, then. Goodbye, then." "Goodbye," thought Edward as Lolly hauled the garbage can out to the truck. "Goodbye," Nellie called, louder this time. Edward felt a sharp pain somewhere deep in his china chest. For the first time, his heart called out to him. It said 2 words: "Nellie, Lawrence." Oh man, here's chapter 11. Things are not looking up. Not looking good for Edward. Edward ended up at the dump. he lay on top of orange peels, coffee grounds, rancid bacon, and rubber tires. The first night, he was at the top of the garbage heap, so he was able to look up at the stars and find comfort in their light. In the morning, a short man came climbing through the trash and rubble. He stopped when he was standing on top of the highest pile. He put his hands under his armpits and he flapped his elbows. The man crowed loudly. He shouted, "Who am I? I'm Ernest, Ernest, who is king of the world. How can I be king of the world? Because I am the king of garbages, and garbages is what the world is made of. Ha, ha, ha! Therefore, I am Ernest, Ernest, who is the king of the world," he crowed again. Edward was inclined to agree with Ernest's assessment of the world being made of garbage, especially after his second day at the dump, when a load of trash was deposited directly on top of him. He lay there buried alive. He could not see the sky. He could not see the stars. He could see nothing. What kept Edward going, what gave him hope, was thinking of how he would find Lolly and extract his revenge. He would pick her up by the ears. He would bury her under a mountain of trash. But after almost 40 days and nights had passed, the weight and the smell of the garbage above and below him clouded Edward's thoughts, and soon he gave up thinking about revenge and he gave in to despair. It was worse, much worse than being buried at sea. It was worse because Edward was a different rabbit now. He couldn't say how he was different. He just knew that he was. He remembered again Pellegrina's story about the princess who had loved nobody. The witch turned her into a warthog because she loved nobody. He understood now. He heard Pellegrina say, "You disappoint me." "Why?" he asked her. "Why do I disappoint you?" But he knew the answer to that question too. It was because he had not loved Abilene enough, and now she was gone from him, and he would never be able to make it right. And Nellie and Lawrence were gone too. He missed them terribly. He wanted to be with them. The rabbit wondered if that was love. Day after day passed, and Edward was aware of time passing only because every morning he could hear Ernest performing his dawn ritual, cackling and crowing about being the king of the world. On his 180th day at the dump, salvation arrived for Edward in a most unusual form. The garbage around him shifted, and the rabbit heard a snuffling and panting of a dog. Then came the frenzied sound of digging. The garbage shifted again, and then suddenly, miraculously, the beautiful, buttery light of late afternoon shone on Edward's face. Oh, I bet that felt wonderful. Okay, there's the next chapter. There's the dog sniffing at Edward. So the next time, we're going to see what that dog does with Edward. I wonder if he's going to take him out of the dump finally. I wonder if he's going to take him back to Lawrence and Nellie. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.